Good evening, everybody. My name is Mike Allison, and I'm an alcoholic. First, I'd like to thank the committee for inviting me here, and for everybody that's helped put this on. This has just been a great weekend. Everybody, let's give them another hand. Let's get this off. I want to do that first off, and I want to thank my friend Cliff for inviting me out here. And I came in a little bit earlier on Thursday and spent the night with Cliff and Lori and had a great time getting to know them. And we had about a 25-hour ride over here yesterday that I thoroughly enjoyed too. And, I want to thank Lori for this smart water. I don't know if it's going to do any good or not, but I've been guzzling it all day since she turned me on to that. I really enjoyed Robin for kicking us off on a great note last night. It was a really awesome story, particularly when you get to the part where you found a God of your understanding, because I found that in here. I never thought I'd find it. I didn't come here looking for friends or God or conscience, and I got all three. So, but no, it was a wonderful story of recovery, and I really enjoyed Lori's talk this morning. I was just so touched by it. My wife's a long-term member of Al-Anon, and without Al-Anon, I wouldn't be standing up here with a wedding ring on my hand, without a doubt. And so I'm really grateful for Al-Anon, and I'm really thankful for Lori's story this morning that really gave the message to it. It touched me as an alcoholic, and I can really hear that message today. And I couldn't hear the message of Al-Anon early on. Every time I'd hear an Al-Anon speaker, I'd think about all the bad things that went on in our home before, and all the bad. I couldn't see the good, and I can see the good now. So thank you so much for that. I really enjoyed the the sponsorship workshop this afternoon. That was great information. I can't ever learn enough about sponsorship. And it's the custom of my home group and groups around Nashville that at the end of the meeting when we close, the chairperson will always call on somebody and say, call on a member of the group and say, would you say in a few words what a sponsor in a home group means to you? I don't know whether you do that here or not, but that's a custom in our area. And every time I get called on to answer that in a few words, I feel so inadequate. Because how do you sum up what sponsorship and a home group does for you in just a few words? I mean, it's impossible, and that's been the most important thing to me to help me to stay up here all this time. I had two sponsors. I've only had two sponsors since I came here, and they've spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours with me, helping me get my life together. And my home group I still have the same home group. It's the Brentwood Full Moon Group in Brentwood, Tennessee. We meet on Friday nights. We'd love to have you if you ever come to the Nashville area. And my home group is a place where I can build a foundation, where I show up on a regular basis and have commitments and be a part of. I went to a roundup last weekend, and I heard an old timer say that he was concerned about the fact that there are so many meetings now. And since I got sober, there are more than twice as many meetings as there used to be when I first came in the program. And unfortunately, there are a lot of meetings and there are not a lot of groups. I mean, they may be registered as groups, but it's more transient than it was. I see more people just saying, well, I'm going to catch this meeting right quick, and it doesn't seem like we're as involved as we once were. So a home group is the most important thing for me as far as keeping me connected here, because I don't ever want to leave here. My sobriety date is February the 12th, 1990, and I picked up a 22-year medallion a week ago Sunday, and I'm just amazed that I'm still here and that I have that, and I'm really grateful for the time I have. But I also want to know that every day that I don't ever want to get too many years and not enough days, because this deal really is a one day at a time thing for me, and I have people remind me of that. I don't know a whole lot from just because I get up here and talk or been around a while. My sponsor in Nashville, Terry, the first time I got a chance to go out of town to tell my story with my wife, we flew to Lincoln, Nebraska several years back, and I let it go to my head. I thought, well, this is great. These people flying me out here because I'm going to get to tell my story, and gee, this is what I always thought this was graduating in AA, that you get to talk out of town or something, And I called my sponsor to check in with him on Saturday morning. I said, hey Terry, I just want to let you know I'm in Lincoln and we're going to talk tonight and I'm excited about it. And I said, how was the meeting last night? He said, oh, it was great. He said, there was probably more people than we've ever had. He said, there were cars parked all over the grass. You know, the parking lot was full and everything. We just had a great meeting. It was one of the best meetings I've ever been to. He said, you want to know something else? I said, what's that? He said, not a damn one of them asked about you. So I need to be reminded of that. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. When we're doing the Al-Anon countdown a minute ago, they ask all the Al-Anons to stand up, and everybody stands up and does, and then there's some applause later on. But as soon as they said all the alcoholics stand up, we all said, yeah! just to stand up, yeah! So, I just love you people. This is the greatest show on earth. Well, before I run out of time, I want to tell you how good things are in my life today. I'll tell you all the ugly stuff and how AA and the 12 steps changed all that, but I don't want to run out of time before I tell you I really have a blessed life today. My life's not perfect. I'm not the wonderful guy in the world, but I have a chance to be the husband I always wanted to be. I have a chance to be the father, the brother, the AA member, the friend that I always wanted to be. I'm a grandfather. I've got an 11-year-old granddaughter that's never seen me drink before, and she just thinks I hung the moon, and it's the greatest thing in the world for me to spend time with her. For all the mistakes I made raising my kids, I get a do-over with my granddaughter. And things are really good in my life. And as long as I stay close to AA like I always have, I've never left here since I came in. And I hope I never leave here. And I see some people come in and their lives get better and they leave. And I don't want to be one of those folks, because the ones that come back usually don't come back to report that they've just really had a great time since they've been gone. So I did want to convey that, because I'm really grateful for the life I have today. I started drinking when I was about 14. My parents they drank, and they worked hard, but they drank hard at night. All their friends drank. That's what I thought they did. They had fun, but sometimes they'd overshoot the mark, and they'd fight or something would happen terrible. But I thought, well, they just, drank a little too much. And the time came when I was out with some boys in a high school. I was trying to get into a high school fraternity at the time, and they had this bottle of Gilby's gin that they were passing around, and everybody was taking sips out of it and said how awful it was, and I took a sip out of it and said how awful it was, and somehow I drank the rest of it, though it wasn't that bad. And I remember getting really drunk, and these guys dropped me off at home, and I came in my house, and my parents were watching TV, laid back on the couch, and so I snuck past them, and I remember going back to my bedroom, and all of a sudden after I got in bed, the bed started spinning round and round, and I started putting my foot on the floor trying to stop it, and next thing I know, I'm throwing up all over. It's sort of like what we heard last night, except it wasn't purple. But I threw up all over the walls and out the window and just I didn't think you could throw up that much, And I got up the next morning and I thought, well, that's just awful. I got over that. And because I did it again, because I thought, well, I must have drank too much. I just overshot the mark. And what I found is that if I could drink the right amount, all the feelings I had of feeling different, of feeling afraid, everything, the shyness I had, that all went away if I could drink just the right amount. I'd feel superior to everybody rather than less than. And that started a pattern just immediately when I was in high school of trying to drink all I could without slurring my words. I mean, that's kind of what my social drinking was like, is trying to drink as much as I could without slurring my words. And I'd overshoot the mark sometimes. But I thought everybody got the same effect from alcohol as I did. I really did, right up until I got here. And for the people that are new here, that's not right. My wife she'll have a glass of wine every now and then. Sometimes she won't, but sometimes she'll just decide, well, yeah, I'll have a glass of wine. And she'll order it and she'll look at it. And then she'll take a couple sips every now and then. And then I catch myself staring at her glass. And I'm thinking, drink, what's wrong with you? But she'll drink some of it and say, well, I don't want any more. You want another one? She'll say, no, I don't want any more. I'm starting to feel it. I'm going, well, yeah, of course that's all you drink for, right? And she says, no, I just, it relaxes me a little bit. And I said, well, sure it does. Wouldn't you want another one? You get more relaxed. And she says, no, I'm starting to feel it. And I'm going, oh, that's alcohol abuse. It really is. But I thought she got the same effect from alcohol as I do, and she doesn't. She never will. She'll never understand why I drink, and I'll never understand why she doesn't. But it's just the way it is. She's not an alcoholic, and she says in her Al-Anon talk that she identifies with all the feelings that we have, except when we talk about drinking, and then that's when it loses her. And but at any rate, so alcohol did for me that some things that I didn't know it was doing for me. It really just made me feel normal for a long time, and I chased that feeling for a long time. I was a poor student, but I worked for this family business that my parents started about the time I was born. So that's the only time I could get respect from my dad. That's the only time I'd see him, and that's the only time I thought that I had any kind of self-esteem and praise from him is when I was working. And so and plus it made me the money to do the kind of stuff I wanted to do. So I took to partying and working as hard as I could really quick. And I thought, this is a great plan, and I thought I'll just ride on this and I'll party like I want to and work as hard as I need to do what I got to do. I fumbled my way through college. I quit college with I lacked 6 hours of getting a degree in business management because I knew I was going to go in this family business. So I quit school and I go get in this family business. And about the time I get into it, my father's wanting to retire from it. So about a year later, he leaves the business. And I'm pretty young. I've got a lot of responsibility, and I'm running this business, and I'm doing pretty well at it. And I'm making lots of money. So I'm buying lots of stuff because aside from drinking and getting that comfort, if I get the right stuff, I feel okay for a while. A new car would be good for about 10 days or so, it seems like. But so I meet this girl. I meet my wife, Diane, and right out of college, and we date for a while, and then she was just trying to fix me all the time, and I didn't want to be fixed. Yeah, some of you understand that in here, I guess. And so we broke up for about a year, but I really did love this woman, but I just couldn't ever get honest with her and tell her how much I loved her. But I had to get my wisdom teeth out. And so my office manager takes me to get my wisdom teeth out, and I go in and they give me all kinds of Valium and Demerol in my arm to take my teeth. I mean, he could have pulled my jaw out, after I felt the effects of it. And so when I get through, I can't talk, but I can write. And so I start writing on this piece of paper, kind of sideways for this guy. I said, call Diane, and wrote this number down. We'd been broken up for about a year. So this guy just calls the number on this napkin I'd written on and said, hey, Diane, this is George, and Mike's had his wisdom teeth out. Will you come take care of him? He wants you to come meet him at his apartment. And she's thinking, George who? Mike who? I mean, she'd moved on. She was living with some other guy at the time. But she came over to my apartment on her lunch break. And I start writing on there, and I'm just fried on these drugs, and I'm writing, I love you, I want you back, move in with me. You know how we're quick about stuff like that. And she did the next day. And we've been together ever since. We got married later on that year. And she's a wonderful woman. She's a wonderful woman. And we had a couple of kids. I have two sons. One just turned 30 this past Sunday. And he lives in Northern California, and my other son is 34, almost 34. He lives in Nashville, and he's the one that has this 11-year-old granddaughter that I love so much. And they were 11 and 8 when I got sober. And a lot's changed since then. I've got 2 older sisters too, and they took care of me when I was younger, and I'm sure I was a thorn in their side in a lot of ways, and I really got estranged from them for a long time. My first sponsor asked me one time, he said, what's the difference? He said, what's the opposite of love? And I said, it's hate. And he said, no, the opposite of love is indifference. And I had to really take a long look at that I'd really been indifferent to these 2 sisters of mine. And I've made amends to both of them later on, and I'm good friends with both of them. One of them lives in Virginia, but the other one lives not too far from me, and we get together on a regular basis. And they're a wonderful part of my life. So I get back together with Diane. I'm running this business. We start having these children. I'm getting really stressed out by my job, I think. But I'm really getting stressed out with my father wanting to come give me advice all the time that I don't want. And, my alcoholism at some point in time, I went from the point of, at one time, when I was younger, I'd say, I drank a 6-pack of Tall Boys last night, bragging on how much I drank. But, somewhere down the road it crossed to, I've only had a couple of drinks. And I don't know when that changed, or when just having fun became just maintenance drinking, but it changed for me over a period of time, and I got really depressed. I started having migraine headaches, and I went to my doctor for all these ailments, and he diagnosed me with clinical depression and gave me a variety of antidepressants that would work a while, then they'd quit working, and then he'd change it or up the dosage or something like that. And but that didn't ever work. The only thing that really gave me peace of mind is a big old drink of Crown Royal and a handful of pills. But that started getting to where it didn't work too, and I started doing all kinds of bizarre things. I was in the landscaping business. Actually, I was in the grass business, the legal kind. But I was in the landscaping business in Nashville, and we live up on a really high hill. I mean, a really high hill. It's one of the highest elevations in Nashville area. And I was convinced that I needed to have this really nice landscaping of this house when we bought it to show off all my expertise that I had. And most of my neighbors on my street don't have any landscaping or grass or anything in their yards. It's just the woods. They just build their houses in the woods. But not me. I'm this big shot landscape guy, so I'm having trouble growing grass because I have all these trees in my yard from the people we bought it from, and it would shade the grass out in the summertime, and then in the fall the leaves would fall and choke the grass out, and I'd have to redo it. So I thought, I'll just cut all my trees down and solve that problem, and I can have it the way I want it. And that'd been a pretty good plan, except that I didn't exactly know where my property line was on one side of me. I knew up at the street, the power poles on the street are my lot lines, so I knew where that was, but my lot goes way down a steep hillside. I mean, I've lived there 35 years, over 35 years, and I've been down there maybe 3 or 4 times. I mean, it's straight up and down. But I go, because I have this keen alcoholic mind, I don't have enough sense to just call a surveyor and say, since I've got sober, I found out you can call a surveyor up and just say, I need to find a property line, and they'll just come do it for you. But, I'm a smart guy, so I go down there with my plat and a compass, and I go down on this hillside, and I'm wandering around. I'm going to find my property boundary down on this hillside, and I find this iron pin in the ground, and I convince myself that that's my property boundary. So that's when I call the surveyor and say, hey, I want you to come out here and flag this property line, because I'm going to cut all my trees down, and I don't know where the line is between me and this guy next door. And these guys came out with this surveying party and all their equipment, and he said, I don't think this is right. But so, I got this laser beam focus. When I make up my mind I'm going to do something, I'm doing it, I'm right, get out of the way, do it the way I want to. So they did it the way I wanted to. And when they came up the hillside, when it got toward my front yard, all these flags and stakes were almost touching my next door neighbor's house. Now, a sane person would have thought, maybe I've made a mistake here. But no, I'm thinking, that old goat, he built his house up here. He's been using my property all this time. He built his house up to the line right there and just been claiming my land. And So I wasn't going to wait till he got home from Florida where he was with his wife, because I'm going to cut these trees down right now. So I get this tree surgery company to come over there with a bucket, with 2 bucket trucks and all these guys with chainsaws. I mean, a bunch of them. And they cut all these trees down according to where I had them flagged, where I told them to do. And it was a lot of trees. According to a jury of my peers, in Chancery Court in Davidson County, it was $50,000 worth of trees. Because when my next door neighbor got home the next couple of days later, he wasn't happy with my surveying at all. And he shouldn't have been, and he sued me successfully. And they asked for a jury trial, which was unusual. But and I'm sitting through this trial with a 3-piece suit on. I'm still acting like I'm trying to be respectable and got it together. And I've sweated all the way through this suit, and I'm eating these blue Valiums, trying to stay calm while his attorney clearly portrayed me as an absolute lunatic to this jury. And they actually awarded him not only the $50,000 they asked for, but $5,000 in additional punitive damages that they didn't ask for. But see, I'm an alcoholic, and when I make mistakes, I learn a way to turn it around where it's your fault, and I'm the victim. I don't know where I learned that, but I did that, and I was just terrible about it. And so by the time we get to court, I'm thinking, well, I just made a mistake. I didn't mean to cut his trees down, which I didn't. But I'm thinking he shouldn't have sued me over that. It was just an accident. It could have happened to anybody. But he did it anyway, so I hated this guy, and every time I'd pull in my driveway, I'd think about him suing me, and I'd just get mad. So every day when I went home from work, I'd get mad at him before I even pulled in my driveway to my house to my family. And, something else I did too, and my wife has since said from an Al-Anon podium that it was her choice at the time, that she wasn't an Al-Anon then, so she probably would have made a different decision. But she didn't ever go to their house again after these people sued us. And she used to go over there every day with my sons when they were small and play, because this was an elderly couple that were really nice people. They were really good people. And I never knew that I destroyed that. I just never knew it. And I'm not saying that to excuse my actions. I just didn't ever think about stuff like that. I'm just thinking about what's happening to me all the time. But I made it worse other than cutting the trees down. I'm not a guy that wants to get even. I want to get ahead. And several years before that, he came to me and he said, my wife has always liked weeping cherry trees. She thinks that's the prettiest tree there is. Is there any way you could get me one? I know you're in the landscaping business. And I said, sure, I can do that. What else you want? And he said, well, I don't know of anything. And I said, well, go ask her if there's any other shrubbery plants she wants. And he comes back and he said, well, she could use this and this and this. So I send one of my crews out and get this weeping cherry tree and all these plants, and send one of my crews up there and plant the stuff for him. And he comes to me a day or two later and says, gosh, I didn't mean for you to plant this stuff. I just was hoping you'd get it for me, but thank you very much. And I know you're in the business, but I'm not expecting this for free. How much do I owe you? And I said, you don't owe me anything. And you see, I'm sure I did some things for fun and for free back then, and things I'd have loved, but not most of the time. Most of the time I was trying to show what a big shot I was, make me look bigger than I was. And I just looked at him, I said, you don't owe me anything. And it was like, look what I can do for you. I don't need your money. So after he sued me several years later for cutting the trees down, I went over there the next night with some herbicide and put on the weeping cherry tree and other stuff and killed it. Well, he hadn't paid me for it, right? I've told this story a bunch of times, and sometimes I go, God, did you really do that? But I really did it. I really did it. And I live on a dead-end street, and every time I'd see him on the street, if he would be coming in his car, I'd ease my car over in his lane like I was playing chicken with him. And I'd curse at him when he got his mail. I was a terrible person to him. I was right next door to this man too, and I did those things to him for a long time. And I let that resentment just burn in me, man. And it's when I burn with a resentment like that, I got to drink. And that's just a small thing that I did. I did all kinds of stuff like that. I was just romping and stomping in life. I wasn't the freewheeling party guy I once was. I was mean and dark. I became a lousy husband. The dark side of alcoholism decides that the relationship I have at home is not good enough. So I started cheating on my wife, and I did that for a long time. And I knew it was wrong when I was doing it, and the guilt was killing me, and it should have, but I'd keep doing it. And I got to the point where I was just, I didn't know what was going on, and I'd keep going back to this doctor, and I'd go to other counselors, and they'd tell me all kinds of stuff to try, and none of that seemed to work. And I got more hopeless all the time, and I got depressed, and I had these migraine headaches, and I'm eating these pain pills for that all the time. And I get to the point where I start trying to stop drinking on my own, and I quit one time for 8.5 months, but I went with my brother-in-laws up to a baseball game in St. Louis. They decided I'd be their sober driver because I hadn't had a drink, and when I got up there, somebody put a drink in front of me at the bar, and I just picked it up and drank it. I had no defense against the first drink. And my best thinking told me that I shouldn't drink that drink, you know, but I just did. I didn't even think about it. And that started the chain all over again. Disappointed my wife one more time. That went on about another 5 months. I was 39 years old when I got sober, and I really wasn't afraid that I was going to die. I just thought, man, I'd be better off dead, you know. And I'd check my life insurance policy sometimes and say, gosh, this is all paid up. If I just check out of here, if I just die, my family will be fine. I mean, those are the kind of insane things I was saying. I didn't know that they wanted me. You know, they wanted just a good husband and father is what they really wanted. They didn't want the money if I died. But I got to the point where my father that resentment grew and grew and grew until I decided to bring my shotgun to work one day, and I was going to shoot his Buick when he pulled in the parking lot. I thought that would give him the message that I didn't want him around, and I suppose it probably would have, but I didn't do that. But that's how nuts I was then. I mean, alcoholism just made me just go off the charts. So I went to my doctor one more time. I said, look, I don't know whether you want to put me in a nut house or what, but I was going to shoot my father's Buick today, and I don't want to do that. I'm afraid I'm going to cause him harm, and everything in my life is just in the toilet. I don't know what to do. And he said, well, go see this lady. And he gives me another psychologist to go see. And I go, oh, great. You know, I've already tried this stuff. But I quit drinking right then when I went to see him that day. And I had this appointment scheduled to see this lady on a Monday. And I go in to see this psychologist, and I walk in her office, and I sit down, and she said, well, before we get started, of course, I want to tell her how my wife's on my back and my father's on my back and all these people and these, you know, all this stress I have with this job and these kids in private schools and all this other stuff I've made up for reasons to drink. And she said, I just want to ask you a few questions to get started with. She said, do you drink? I said, no, ma'am, I don't. She said, you don't drink at all? I said, no. And I really think that you could have put my hand on a lie detector and I would have passed. And she said, well, did you ever drink? And I said, yes. And she said, well, when did you quit? I said, Thursday. And that's a lie. I found an old calendar that I used to write all my appointments on, and I quit on Friday, but I couldn't even be honest about that. I had to add a day to it, like it sounded like it was longer, I guess. And then she said, well, do you take any drugs? And that was the point where I just started crumbling. I said, yeah, I do. And she said, what kind of drugs do you take? And I told her all the stuff that I had prescriptions for that I was getting from my doctor, and then I told her about all the things I was getting from undocumented pharmacists and the Valium deficiency I thought I had and all that stuff, you know. And she said, well, do you have any drugs with you now? And I said, yeah, I do. And she said, what do you have? And I pulled out my change, and I started going through my change and counting, and I had 37 blue Valiums in my change, and she thought that was a lot. But I'd quit drinking on Friday, and I was a little jumpy, so I need something to take the edge off, you know. So I bought 100 of them. You dope heads have done the math on how many I'd taken, I guess, by now. And so at that point, I wish I'd seen the look on her face then. But she said, before we go any further, I want you to have an addiction evaluation done. And I thought, wait a minute, I ain't even told you about my wife or my father yet, So, but I didn't know what to do. I didn't know anything about alcoholism. I didn't think I had a drinking problem or a drug problem. I really didn't. I really didn't. I had no clue. So I go with my wife to this next guy, and we fill out these forms, and then he gets us together. And he said, this isn't rocket science. This is pretty standard stuff. And what you've told me, you've been an alcoholic and a drug addict for probably 15 years, and if you don't get some help pretty soon, you're going to die. And the first thing went through my mind was, how could you say that in front of my wife? Not that that's, a threat to my very existence, that I'm a dying man. It's like, how could you say that in front of her? My ego will just go to any length to protect itself. I mean, it'll kill me. It really will. So the guy said, you need to go to treatment, you need to go to AA. And I'm thinking, oh, yeah, great. And Diane says, well, what do I do? She hadn't been to Al-Anon yet. What can I do? And the guy said, just pack his bag. So we leave this guy's office, and I'm really coming apart then because I hadn't had a drink or any of the other stuff for about a week or so, and I'm starting to come unglued. And the reason why I know I'm an alcoholic is that sobriety just makes me crazy. When I stop drinking, I don't feel better. I feel better when I stop having hangovers and throwing up, but I start feeling worse. Alcoholism just makes me just nuts. I was telling somebody today, my sponsor took me to see Clancy in Memphis when I was about a year sober, and I still didn't know how I fit here, or didn't have an explanation of how I really felt. And he said a couple of things that night that I'll never forget. He said the natural state of a sober alcoholic is growing depression and anxiety. And I never thought of that, because I always thought people would say, why don't you slow down on your drinking? But when I'd quit drinking, I'd get worse. I'd have this growing depression and anxiety. And the other thing he said is the thing that makes alcoholism a fatal disease is that sobriety eventually becomes emotionally unbearable. And I know some people that have suffered from alcoholism and it becomes emotionally unbearable, and there's been a lot I know that have taken their own lives because of it. And from that point on, I go after seeing this guy, and I said, I can't go to treatment. I'm too busy. I've got this business that's not doing too well, and I just can't do that. And this guy said, well, you might be able to go to an outpatient program, but you still need to go to AA. He said, go see these people. And for the next couple of days, I'm coming unraveled, and I'm seeing all these billboards around town advertising treatment centers, and I'm thinking, oh, man, I've overreacted here. They just know I got good insurance. They're trying to rip me off some more. But I'm hurting inside, and I don't know what to do. And by the way, after I went to this guy's office that gave me this terrible news, that was on February the 19th. That was 7 days after I hadn't had a drink. And I'm feeling like the insulation just stripped off my wiring and somebody's plugged me into a 220. I'm so nervous. And we went from this guy's office straight to my younger son's 8th birthday party at a bowling alley with all his friends. But I somehow made it through that. I don't know. That was the worst birthday party I ever went to. But I go see this treatment center lady, and I tell her, she says, well, you can come here for 6 weeks. And I said, I'm really too busy for that. But I know how to quit on my own, and I'll just do that for now. And I'll come back this fall when I have time and, do your classes or whatever it is. She said, just because you quit using doesn't mean you're going to quit hurting. And so I thought, well, maybe I ought to do this. Maybe I ought to make time to do this. And I actually went to my first AA meeting before I started the treatment center. And that was on the 23rd of February. So that was 11 days after I'd quit, or 13 days rather. And I go to the Full Moon group the first night. That's still my home group in Brentwood. And I go in there and the parking lot's full. And I'm thinking I got there on the wrong night, that this must be some church function. You know, sure, this A&A thing wouldn't have this many people. It's probably a couple old guys in trench coats shaking and puking on each other. I didn't know anything about AA or recovery. And I go in there, and of course I get there late, and there's all these the cars in the parking lot, and there's nobody there except this one guy who is this local rock and roll singer that I would always go see every time he was performing in the club. And of course I'd always get hammered every time I'd go see this guy, and I assumed he was too, and he was for a long time, years before that. But I see this guy in the parking lot, and I'm going, you know, this guy must be going to church or something. You know, he's too hip, slick, and cool to be in this A&A thing. But he catches my look, and he comes over to me in the parking lot, and he said, "Can I help you?" And I thought, man, this guy's too cool. I can't ask him this. And I'm saying, well, you know, he said, "Can I help you?" And I said, is there an AA meeting here? I'm looking for an AA meeting. And he said, "Yeah, mate, you're in the right place." And this guy opened the door for me. And I was stunned to find out later on that he had 4 years of sobriety. And I mean, this guy was a cool guy. And I thought, well, golly, maybe, you know, maybe, if this guy can get sober, maybe I got a shot. Really, is kind of how it was. And I was so afraid that somebody was going to see me in an AA meeting. I was so afraid of that. And, you know, I parked my car in front of the front door of the Cockeyed Camel Pub every day at 5 o'clock, and I didn't ever think anything about that. But I go in the meeting, and they somehow knew I was new. And they proceeded to have a first step meeting for me. And I got a lot of business cards, and they passed around a sheet, and everybody signed it and put their phone number on. I've still got that at home. And that's the first time anybody had told me, "Keep coming back," or "Welcome, we're glad you're here." That's the first time I'd heard that in a long time. And I was just tired. Terry said, my sponsor said, that I didn't have any clue that I wanted to be there, but I was just sad and needed a change. He could tell I just needed a change. And these guys started telling how they got there. And this one guy, Joe, I'll never forget him, he said he had 2 DUIs in one day. Twice. Twice he had done that. And I'm thinking, I'm sitting there and I'm dressed pretty good, and, you know, I've got this business and a house and this family. Somehow I'm juggling keeping all this together, but it's in shambles. And I'm thinking, I'm not that bad. And I've never had a DUI. And I've driven drunk with my children in the car a lot that I'm ashamed of. Every now and then I'll drive down a stretch of road that I used to go back and forth to work, and right in one spot right there, I remember one particular time when I had both my sons in the car drunk when I was driving, and I just shudder when I go through there. I'm so ashamed of that, and I hope I never do that again. But I'm thinking, this guy had 2 DUIs in one day twice, and I've never had one yet. I'm not that bad. And the guy that's my sponsor now would sleep with a pint of vodka and wake up in the middle of the night and shaking and drink half of it to stop shaking and put the cap back on and put it under his pillow and sleep a couple more hours till his alarm went off, and he'd wake up and he'd be shaking again, and he'd drink the rest of the pint of vodka where he could stop shaking enough where he could brush his teeth and shave where he could go to work, because he never missed a day of work. And I'm thinking, I don't drink like that. You know, I don't have to drink all you know, that kind of stuff. Immediately, as bad as I was feeling, sitting there with a 9mm pistol in my pocket that I carried everywhere, scared to death, and everybody's scared of me. I'm sitting there wanting to kill myself on a daily basis, and yet I'm sitting there thinking I'm not as bad as these people already. I mean, just immediately, I think I'm not that bad. And but they told me to come back, and I felt loved at my first meeting. You know, the more I'm around here, Dr. Bob really had it right. When it's all boiled down to, it's just love and service. I know we got 12 steps that we do that take the action to straighten out our lives, but the way I've got to present the 12 steps to somebody is with love and service. I don't need to beat a guy up when he first comes in here. He's beating himself up enough. And so after I go to my first meeting, they told me about a couple other meetings, and I started going to a couple more. And I went in this outpatient treatment center, and I go in there, and I go through that for 6 weeks, and I did everything they told me to do. That's the first time I'd ever followed directions that I can ever remember. And one of the things I had to do when I got out of there, well, I had to go to 5 meetings a week, which I said, you mean 5 meetings? They said, no, 5 meetings a week. And I said, well, I'm too busy. I can't do that. But I still do that after all this time. You know, I have to participate in my own recovery. I got to build my recovery. I can't build my recovery around my life. I got to build my life around my recovery. That's the only shot I've got to stay in here. So I'm going to AA, but on the last week of getting out of this treatment center, I had to get a sponsor. So I go to this guy in my home group, a guy named Buff, and I thought he must be president of AA or something because everybody liked him and he said great things in the meeting. And he's really a great guy in meetings. And so I went up to him after a meeting. I said, you know, Buff, I got to get a sponsor before I get out of treatment next week. That was my way of asking him because I'm so shy, I just got to give you a lead in where you'll volunteer. And he just looked at me and said, well, you ought to ask somebody, and walked off. And so I didn't know you could call people back then, but I waited till I saw him the next time. I said, will you be my sponsor? He said, sure, I'll do that. I've loused a lot of things up with finance and romance in my life, but if you'll take the 12 steps with me like I took them with my sponsor, your life will change whether you want it to or not. And that may be the best thing anybody's ever told me because it's been the truth. And I started following this guy around. And I know that we're reading how it works that some of these we balked. I balked at all the steps. I want to know what it's going to do for me before I take the action. I want to figure it out. You know, I wasted a lot of time doing that and probably almost left here by waiting on that. But little by little I started doing that. I didn't know at first that I was powerless over alcohol. I thought the guy that had to sleep with the pint of vodka all night and drink on it was powerless over alcohol. I really thought I could quit. And then I thought about the times that I would quit for a while and then just start again. And I realized I don't have any control over my drinking anymore. And but it was easy to get, you know, part B of step one. You know, my hair was unmanageable. My life was a wreck. And so that was easy to swallow. And by the way, when I read the big book as best I could the first time, I was amazed at how in the heck did those guys know how I am in 1938? I was just stunned how many similarities I had in there. But I came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. I knew I was insane. I was doing a lot of insane things. But I really didn't have a relationship with God. I went to church when I was a kid, and I really never caught on with that. When I married Diane, we did some counseling in that church, and then little by little I left there too. And I really just didn't have a relationship with God. And I thought, well, I'm willing to do that, but you know, I don't know how that's going to go. My sponsor said, why don't you get on your knees in the morning and ask God to direct your day? He said, yeah, I don't think you need to tell him to keep you from drinking. That's his job. You just get him to direct your day. And he said, get on your knees at night and thank him for keeping you clean sober that day. And I went, okay, I'll try that. And a couple of days later, he said, how you doing with that? And I said, I'm not doing that. And he said, what do you mean? I said, that stuff doesn't work for me. He said, well, Hollis, what have you got to lose? And I didn't have an answer for him. So little by little, I started doing that. And that's a practice I've always done. And that got me started a little bit. And about 30 days into sobriety, I'd thrown away all the booze I had and all the other things I was taking, except I kept this bottle of pain pills because I'd get these migraine headaches every now and then. I told myself I'm going to need this stuff when I have these headaches. I didn't tell my sponsor or anybody else. I just kept them. And sure enough, I get one of these headaches after one of my meetings one night, and it feels like an ice pick sticking in my eye. It's real painful. And I'm driving home from my home group, and I'm in tears because I'm scared and I'm in a lot of pain. And I look down and I see that bottle of pain pills on there on the console, street light shining through. It was pouring down rain. I just rolled the window down and I said, please, God, help me. And I threw them out the window. And as soon as I did it, I went, what have I done? You know, I want to grab them in the air, you know. But that's when I reached out and said that prayer, please, God, help me. And I said the third step prayer, and I thought I'd taken the third step and made that decision to turn my will and life over to the care of God. And I didn't understand that. I didn't really know what to do with that, but I was willing to try. But then I started making some mistakes along the way. I was hearing everybody talk about being rigorously honest and telling in a general way of what we've done and making amends. And I was so guilty about cheating on my wife that I'm thinking I got to make amends to her. And of course, I don't tell my sponsor or anybody else, but I got to make amends to her. And I get her in a conversation one night and told her in a general way that I'd been unfaithful to her. And I thought she'd say, well, gosh, no big deal. You're in AA now. No, don't worry about it. I can't. Oh, man, I told my sponsor I'd done that, and he just went nuts. He said, that's why they number the steps for smart college boys like you. He said, you're not on the 9th step. You're not even on step 4 yet. And he said, by the way, Hoss, all you did was dump your guilt. And that's all I did. I dumped my guilt on her. And it made the situation worse. We had a bad situation, and that made it worse. And she didn't leave me, though. And she could have, but she didn't. And later on, I'll fast forward a little bit on this. When it came time when I did get on the 8th and 9th step, I just asked my sponsor, what can I do to make amends to her? And he made a suggestion at that time of writing her a letter. And I wrote her a letter to make amends to her, and she tore it up, and it wasn't acceptable to her. And it took another 5.5 years after that before I was able to make amends to her that were satisfactory to her. And a lot of people sitting there and saying, well, I ain't waiting around for 5 years to fix a relationship. But I want to tell you, it's been well worth it for me. I'm so grateful that she stayed with me and that we had enough recovery between us that we could work that out. And we have a relationship that's built on honesty and trust now. And I keep that slate clean. And I know the scars are there. I wish I could undo the scars, but that's for her and God to heal on her part. But because of what I do here, I can be the kind of husband she deserves, and that I want to be. So I tell her, try to make amends and dump this on her, and Buff goes crazy. And then all of a sudden, I'm just thinking, this stuff doesn't work. There for a while, I was off the first 3 steps. I was just feeling wonderful. I was learning the lingo in meetings, and I went to my home group one night, and I said, I think the promises are coming true for me, even though I'm just on the 3rd step. Shouldn't have said that in front of this old timer named Frank. He said, you're doing the alcoholic waltz. I said, what do you mean? He said, you're getting too well too quick. You're doing the alcoholic waltz. 1, 2, 3, drunk. 1, 2, 3, drunk. And I thought, well, you don't know it. I went to treatment. You don't know all the things I learned, But little by little, living off the first 3 steps got me so uncomfortable with untreated alcoholism that I was ready to kill myself again because I wasn't getting better. I was learning all the talk and all that stuff and going through the motions, but I wasn't doing anything. And all of a sudden, this God I'm praying to, it's like I'm praying to air. I don't believe any of this stuff. I don't believe this stuff I'm doing. This isn't real. And I got really cynical again. And then I got really scared because I thought, people don't even, if they knew who I really was inside, they wouldn't do business with me. My customers would all leave in a minute. I may be the lousiest lover my wife could ever have. I couldn't do anything right. I was terrified of everything that was in my life that I was doing. I had a complete and total lack of confidence in everything I was doing. And it just scared me to death. And I called Buff and I said, what do I do? And he said, well, meet me at this clubhouse. And so he didn't say he was going over there right away. I'd sit over there for a couple hours waiting on him. But he said, whatever God you have, you need to fire that one and get one you can really lean on and depend on. You got to have a God of your understanding to help you through this stuff. This stuff isn't self-help. You're going to go through some exercises of the steps that sound like self-help, but you got to have a power to help you with this stuff. And so what I started realizing is, what is my higher power? I can profess to you all day long of what God is to me, but watch what I do and see what I depend on. I've had money as my God. I've had sex as my God. I've had whiskey as my God. I had my father as my God, and he never wanted the job. I put him on a pedestal he never wanted to be on. He was just another man trying to do the best he could, and he loved me. I didn't think he loved me the way I wanted to be loved, but he did a great job of loving me, and I never could see that. I had my sponsor as my my higher power for a long time, and he got unavailable for a while. He had some things happen in his life, and he wasn't available to me. I've had my marriage. I thought, man, if I lose this marriage, I just can't make it. So I actually use all those things, all those worldly things, as my higher power. And so what I had to do is just one by one eliminate all those things and say, there's something else out there, that far surpasses and supersedes this. And what I found, I really discovered this when I turned 20 years sober, that my God keeps getting bigger and greater and stronger and more loving all the time. All the time. And that hadn't changed yet. And that's one of the beautiful things that I never thought I'd see if I stuck around here. So I started trying to find this higher power I could really believe in. And I got desperate enough I thought, at this 10.5 month stage, I was either going to drink again, blow my brains out, or start doing a 4-step. And I really didn't know which one to do, but I started writing a 4-step. And I wrote these resentments, and I thought, man, this is great. I can list all these people I hate, because it was just about everybody I knew. And I could write down what they did to me and how it affected me. I thought, now we're getting somewhere. And because I'm the victim, And I write down all these columns of what people had done to me, my father, my next door neighbor, my wife, and everybody else. But then I got in that 4th column that says, what were the mistakes I made? What did I do to make these resentments worse? And I'd never looked at that in my life. But for the first time, I started looking at not what I'm trying to be or make you think I am. How did I really live my life? And I had to write down all those things, how I treated people in my life. And I got a good accounting on how it failed. I didn't like it, but it's a great exercise to do. And I know a lot of people put it off. Some people never do it, but I had to do it. It's just a step. The steps aren't. And sometimes I kind of treat it that way. I made a fears list. According to what my sponsor showed me in the big book, I listed my fears, and it said we ask ourselves why we had them, and I wrote all these elaborate explanations of what my fears were. But that's just a drunk trap, because the next sentence in the book says, wasn't it because self-reliance failed us? And I looked at all my explanations on there, and it was just because I was trying to be my own higher power and my own sponsor and my own home group, and that wasn't working so well. I heard a guy say last weekend, when you're playing God, there's a lot of people not doing your will. I like that. I did a sex inventory. I tried to write down every relationship I had, whether it was short-term or long-term, including my wife. And I've been married 15 years at this time. And I really just could have written the same story of each relationship, how they started, what they were about, how I was selfish and self-centered, how it always failed, blow it up, go get another one. And when I saw that, I thought, well, my wife and I have this same pattern, and I've loused up trying to make amends to her and made that situation worse. This will never get fixed. And my sponsor said, don't underestimate the power of God. You might stay together, and you might not, but, give God a chance. So I just persisted in that. And he said, I want you to come to my house and do your 5th step. So I go over there, and he said, part of this, he showed me in the book that people drank again if they didn't get clean with all the secrets they had with God and another human being. And so I write this stuff down in code on a piece of paper, so if anybody finds the paper, they wouldn't know what it meant. All this stuff I was embarrassed that I didn't want to share. I go over to his house, and he invites God into the room with us, and he said, what's the worst thing on your list? And I look at the code, and I tell him something on there that I'm really ashamed of, and he told me the worst thing that was on his list. And that put me at ease that here's one alcoholic that loves me enough to share his garbage with me to help me feel comfortable enough to do the same. And so I go through these lists that these 3 inventories I had, and I told him some of these other secrets, and he asked me 2 or 3 times, if you left anything out. And I'd look at the code, and I think, well, I told him this other stuff, I don't need to tell him all this stuff. So I leave. And I go to my office for an hour to review what I've done, and I get about a block away, and it dawns on me that I've left something out. And maybe that's when I took the first step, that I really, really believe I'm the real deal. I'm a real alcoholic. Because a good friend of mine had just come into my home group the day before and picked up yet another desire chip, because he said he'd taken a 5th step and left something out, and it ate his lunch, and he got drunk over it. And I thought, if that can happen to him, if I'm a real alcoholic, I've got to do all this stuff. I don't get to do it cafeteria style. And I picked up my phone and I called my sponsor and I said, "Hey, Buff, I got to tell you something. I left something out." And he starts laughing in the phone. And that's not what I wanted to hear, because I'm sweating bullets that I'm telling my sponsor that I lied to him. Plus, I'm going to tell him this other trash that I wish I didn't have to tell him. And I said, "Why are you laughing?" He said, "Well, usually it takes a couple of hours before they call back. You're easy." And so I tell him this stuff. And he said, "I love you anyway." And I've gotten to tell that to a lot of men that I've listened to their fifth step. I love you anyway. I don't care what you bring to the table. We're broken people when we come here. And this is the place that we get healed. So I go out to my office and I open up my book and I review what I did, and I was pretty comfortable with what I'd done so far. And I read steps 6 and 7, and they're a paragraph each. And I'm thinking, great, finally I can get to do 2 steps, bing, bing, after all this hard work and sweating I've been doing. There was somebody in the sponsorship workshop today that said they were on 6 and 7. I hope they're here tonight, because they were concerned about where to go from here and thought they might need to go back and do another 4-step. And my experience has been that a lot of people get to do a 4th and 5th step, and they don't want to seem to move on. They'd rather go back and look at some more inventory. And what I want to do is go back and pick at scabs and look at more stuff about me. And the truth of the matter is, if I don't move far ahead, when I make amends to people, that's when I start carrying my recovery into the real world and getting out of the little lonely world I was in. It involves other people in my recovery, and that's when the promises come true. And I held off doing that for a while because I thought, well, I've written these inventories down and I know how I fail, so I'm not going to do these things anymore. But I found over a couple of months that I was that sarcastic, arrogant, biting person that I was. And I got to where I didn't like me anymore. I just knew I was a failure, and I was still doing it over and over again. And that's when I realized that I was trying to do as a self-help program, that I didn't have the power to take that stuff away. And it came to a head when I was on vacation and I was cussing out my father-in-law on his boat and yelling at my kids, and we're on Christmas vacation, supposed to be having a great time down in the Florida Keys and Paradise. And I'm just being just an awful person again, just stark raving sober. And I know why. And I called my sponsor and I said, "Man, this is the stuff I've done." And he laughs again and says, "Congratulations, Hoss, you're trying to remove your own character defects. Why don't you find a quiet place somewhere and get on your knees and say the 7-step prayer like you mean it, and then let's get busy on these amends." Well, since I'd made amends to my wife, I thought, and I'd given up on my plan, and I thought, I'm just going to write down the list of the people that I'd harmed, write down the harm I caused them, and I left a blank, and I just gave it to Buff, and I said, "Man, help me with this. You've been around the block." And the great thing about having a sponsor, particularly in making amends, is they've been there before. They've done the work, and they know the pitfalls, and they're also not emotionally charged in my stuff, where they can just give me clear guidance. So he made things, all kinds of suggestions about what to do about making amends. I told you I made amends to my wife, and that took a ways. That took a while. But my dad, I wrote a letter to my dad, and by the time my dad it got around the time to making amends, my mother had died several years before I got sober, and I was drunk when she died. She had a stroke and never recovered after a couple of months and passed away. And all I did was sit in a funeral home with a big bottle of Crown Royal and some pills and think about how miserable time I was having. And you're allowed grief, I understand that, but I wouldn't have used to anybody. I wouldn't have support to my dad or my wife or my sisters or my sons or anybody or his friends. I was just there, and that's the best I could do. And after she died, my dad wound up being in a assisted living home, and one of the things I had to do, one thing, I think that when I do the right thing, I'm supposed to feel warm and fuzzy every time I do it, and sometimes I take the right action, I feel lousy, and one of them was I had to take my car keys away from my dad because he kept running into things, and I had to take those keys away from him, and he was in this assisted living facility, and I wrote him a letter and thanked him for all the things and opportunities he'd given me, and that I knew he was a great father, and I'd failed as a son, and I was I was hoping to be a better son to him and be the kind of son he wanted and deserved. And we got along pretty good for a while after that. However, that relationship got bad again, and he and I didn't get along again. And since I would have to drive him around places because my sisters were out of town, we'd wound up arguing because he was telling me what to do, how to drive and all that stuff, and I didn't like that. And we'd wind up cussing each other and all this kind of stuff, and sometimes I'd call my sponsor in tears. I'm saying, man, I made amends to this guy and it still isn't working. And he said, well, there's something else there maybe you need to dig on. And so I jumped to step 10, and I did some more inventory on my relationship with my dad. And what I found out is at this time, I'm 40 years old. I'm making my own way for a long time in my life, but I'm still, in the back of my mind and in my heart, I'm dependent on him. I know he's my go-to guy. He was a guy that had wealth and some influence, and I wanted that. You know, my greed wanted that. And I was afraid if I ever just treated him like another human being, he might cut me off from that. And so I never could stand up to him. And I told my sponsor, I said, it's just my greed. That's what it is. He said, well, that's easy. He said, just get on your knees and pray every night for 3 weeks that when he dies, he leaves everything to your sisters. And I didn't want to hear that, but I was in so much pain that I did that, and I got free of it. And we had a pretty good relationship until he died. And I used to say from the podium that we never had a good relationship. And the truth matter is he died about a year and a half sober, almost 2 years. I was almost 2 years sober when he passed away. And we just ran out of time. If we'd had more time, I know that relationship would have been better, you know. But I guess I got to get around to my next door neighbor now. I gave you all that long story about cutting his trees down and poisoning his tree and all that stuff. Well, my sponsor said when you make amends to people, you don't just go tell them you're sorry, because they already know what a sorry so-and-so you are. He said you go to them and you can apologize, but you have to do something to repair the damage if you can. If you're going to create further harm, you don't do that. You stay willing. But he said in this man's case, you need to go see him, your next door neighbor, and apologize to him, and go and plant another cherry tree for him, the one that you poisoned. He said, now you don't need to tell him you poisoned it. You don't need to tell him you know how it died. It's important that you just plant him the tree. If you go say, hey, I poisoned your tree, but I want to plant you another one, he said that would detract from that. He said he didn't need to know that information. And I don't know about anybody else, but when I become aware of an amend I got to make, those people get in front of me pretty quickly. And I pull in my driveway, and coming back from the back room group on a Sunday morning a couple of days later, and there he is out there on his riding lawnmower. And my heart started pounding. And I said, God, I don't know what I'm supposed to do exactly here, but give me the right words to say and give me the power to carry this out, whatever I'm supposed to do. And I got out of my car and I walked around the 8-foot wood fence that I put up between us to screen him out after he sued me. They'd been there for years. And I walk over and he sees me walking over there to him on his lawnmower, and he freaks out because he knows he can't get in a high enough gear in that riding mower to get away from me, because he's afraid of me. My own neighbor was afraid of me. Boy. But I go over to him, and I remember walking over to him, and he cuts the lawnmower off, you know, and I said, Mr. Logan, have you got a minute where I can talk to you? And he gets off the riding lawnmower and he said, sure, what is it? And I said, I did a terrible thing cutting your trees down a long time ago. And I've disrespected you in a lot of ways over the years. And I was wrong to do all those things. And I don't know what I can ever do to repair the damage from that, but I'm willing to do whatever it is. I'm trying to change some things in my life, and I'll just do whatever it is I can do to repair that. Now, I'm here to tell you, I didn't mean to say that. That's what came out of my lips. So when I asked God for what to come out, that's what came out, that I told him I'd do anything. And I really thought the man would come over and just say, well, just get off my property and don't ever come around me again. I really thought he'd do that, because that's the way I used to handle people that I didn't like in my life. Just get out of my life. And if he'd asked me to do that, I would have done that. But instead, he came up to me and he put his arms around me, and he started hugging me, and he started crying. It seemed like a long time he did it, but I'm sure it was just a few seconds. And Oh boy, I didn't know what to do. I'm just standing there and he's hugging me, crying, this 80-year-old man. And he pulled back away from me and he looked me in the eyes and he said, "What's in the past is over." And the first thing goes through my mind is, okay, he's forgiven you, get out of here, run. I mean, I wanted to run. I really did. I'm a runner. But I had a sponsor that had given me clear directions. His voice said, "No, you got stuff to do here." And I said, well, I thank you for forgiving me, but I said, I really want to do something to make up for this. And he said, "You already have." He said, "The thing that hurt us the most was that we'd lost our neighbor, and we've been praying all these years that we'd get our neighbor back, and our prayers have been answered." And that's when I realized that when I'd been cussing him every day when I pull in the driveway, he'd been praying for me every day. My sponsor told me about a year ago, he said, if your God doesn't get big enough, why don't you borrow Mr. Logan's for a while? And I said, "Look, I want to do something to make up for this." And he said, "You already have by coming over here." And I said, "Well, I noticed your cherry tree died over there." "Could I plant you another one?" And he said, "Really, you don't have to do that." And I said, "Well, I'd like to if you'll let me." And he said, "Well, Miss Logan would probably like that." Well, I didn't have my people anymore. I'd about alcoholically managed my business down to ground zero. But my older son and I went and got a bigger weeping cherry tree, and he and I went over there and planted it. And this man wrote me a letter that I carry in my big book. And when I got this letter a long time ago, I never thought I'd get to read it like I have. But I know he wrote it because it was special, and you need to hear this. This is dated June 26, 1991. "Dear Mike, it was with much surprise that we found the beautiful cherry tree in our yard when we returned home yesterday. We had not expected it so soon. We appreciate it so very much, and we will care for it, and we will cherish it always, not only for its own sake, for it is a beautiful tree, but because it symbolizes a deep and lasting friendship between us and you and your family. We pray that God will bless you and your family in all that you do, and we pray for ourselves, for we are a sinful people by nature. There are none of us without fault, and we need His constant love and forgiveness. Again, we thank you for the tree. We're all the more grateful because you did not have to do it. Your friendship means more to us than you know. Most sincerely, George Logan." This man gave us a country ham every year for Christmas until he died. The very first flowers that came to the funeral home when my father died was a wreath of purple orchids from Mr. Logan, and I've still got one on my desk. He died several years later, and I was able to go to his funeral because y'all have taught me to show up for stuff like that, for funerals and weddings and graduations. The stuff that I used to think wasn't as important to go to as I do now. And I'm going through the receiving line at this man's visitation, and I'm shaking hands with people I don't know, and all of a sudden I shake hands with this one guy, and he said, "Oh yeah, you're Mr. Allison. Dad told us about you." And I go, "Oh great." He said that y'all had a disagreement, but that you'd made it right. And you see, I didn't make that right. I'm a guy that, is the neighbor from hell. I'm the guy that damaged that stuff and made it worse. I'd have gone to the grave hating this guy. But I was so desperate to get my life in order, and I didn't want to drink again, that I was desperate enough, given the desperation, to follow the directions of a sponsor who just did nothing but take me through the 12 steps. He just took me through the steps. I was desperate enough to make a 9th step amends. I didn't know that was going to turn out that way. And that's when the promises started coming true for me. That's when I started knowing a new freedom and a new happiness. I wasn't afraid to pull in my driveway anymore. I took that fence down between us. And I got a couple things I want to share with you before I go. I know I'm running out of time. I don't know exactly when I started. But my first sponsor spent an endless amount of time helping me get my life together. My life really greatly improved after that. He was my sponsor for 10 and a half years, and he contracted lung cancer. And he was sick for a long time before he left us. And people started asking me right in his final days, who are you going to get for another sponsor when Buff's gone? And I put him off. I said, as long as Buff's alive, he's my sponsor, which he was. But after he finally passed away, I had a couple of somebodies come to me a day or two later and said, what are you going to do for a sponsor now? Well, I put him off again. And then I went home and I started thinking. I thought, you've been sober 10 and a half years. You've taken all the steps. Your life's good. You're comfortable. You know what Buff would tell you to do anyway. You don't really need to get another sponsor now. Yeah, boy, I'm glad y'all laughing too, because that is insane. I don't care how long I'm in here. I really need sponsorship. I can shine the spotlight, the flashlight in the dark for another guy, but I can't shine it for me. I don't know why that is, but that's just the way it works for me. And so I think that's crazy. So I pick up the phone and I call Terry. And now Terry got in there about 6 months ahead of me, and I watched him go through the steps, and I saw his life getting good, particularly when he was making amends. And I kind of rode his coattails because I wanted what he had. And Buff was his sponsor too. And I called Terry. I said, look, I just had this conversation in my head that I don't need to get another sponsor since Buff died, and that's just nuts. Will you be my sponsor? And Terry said, sure I will, but I'm not Buff. And you see, I have this contempt prior to investigation. I think I know what I need all the time. I thought I needed another guy like Buff in my life. And the truth of the matter is Terry's not like Buff at all. And Terry's now been my sponsor longer than Buff was. And I've learned more about living one day at a time from him than I could have ever got from anybody else. Now, the thing of it is, though, is I think I'm helping me when I take these actions, but he was having the same conversation in his head that he didn't need to get another sponsor either until I called him. So he picks up the phone and calls another guy, Dave W., and says, oh, Allison just called me and said he's got to get another sponsor, and he asked me to be a sponsor, so will you be mine? So every time I think I take an action, it helps somebody else, usually that I don't even know about. And this contemporary investigation thing, I'm telling you, I got it bad. When I was about 10 or 11 years sober, my son that just turned 30 last Sunday, he was in the 8th grade and he got kicked out of the 8th grade one day. They called me one day and said, we found marijuana in Brian's tennis shoe and you got to come get him. We have zero tolerance. So he's kicked out of school for a year. I had to go down there and pick him up. And at this time, I'm in AA, my wife's in Al-Anon, my kids are in Alateen, we got Ala-Dog, Ala-Cat, everything. We are Mr. and Mrs. Recovery, and I get to go pick up my kid because he's got some weed in his tennis shoe. And my ego had grown back. Like, boy, look at me, look how special we are. And of course, Brian said it belonged to another kid, but you know how that goes. And so I go pick him up, and I'm just furious. And the other thing is we can't get him. It's in the middle of the school year, and we can't get him in another school. Private schools don't want a kid kicked out of a public school for drugs in the middle of a year. They just don't like that. So we didn't know what we were going to do. At the last minute, we get him into this alternative learning center for kids that had been kicked out of school. And only problem was it was on the other side of town from where we live and on the other side of town from where my business was. And every day I was going to have to go pick him up in a 5-minute window at 2 o'clock every day for a year while he was kicked out and had to go to this alternative learning center. And I'm thinking, is this my reward for all these good things I do in an AA, working all these steps? My kid gets kicked out and I got to screw up my day at work and go all the way over there and get him and either take him over to our house or take him back out to my farm. And I'm thinking, I'm thinking it's a bad deal that I have to do this. What it did was it forced me to spend time with my son that I wouldn't have done. I had riding time with him every day for a year. And I got to know that man, and he just turned 30 last Sunday, and I'm so proud of him, the man he's grown into being. And that, what I thought was such a burden on me, turned out to be such a blessing. It was such a blessing. I had another time where either vandals or arsonists burned my shop down, my office and shop down one time. And I was waiting in the snow for the fire marshal to come out and investigate it. I'm sitting in my pickup truck because I don't have a building anymore. And I'm just thinking, this is just the worst day of my life. And I get a phone call from my older son, who's a college student at the time. He said, "Hey, Dad, how would you like to be a grandfather?" I said, what now, God? And his girlfriend was pregnant. And so immediately I go A to Z. They're not going to have insurance. They're going to get in a wreck, and somebody's going to get killed. I'm going to have to pay for it, and just on and on and on and on. It's going to be awful. And I have this granddaughter now, Eris. Her initials are AA. Go figure. And my wife said that when we bring her to the meetings on Friday night that she comes in and comes into our room and hugs all the worst alcoholics in the room. So Diane's just having a fit over what she'll turn out to be. But she's a wonderful young lady. And the other thing is, one thing Buff told me on his deathbed, he said, Michael, if you don't keep the Monday night meeting honest, I'll come back and haunt you. And I believe him, because I think he does come back and haunt me every now and then. I'll catch myself telling somebody something in a meeting. And I always thought about that. I thought, this man worked so hard to help me straighten out my life. How could I ever repay this man? And about a week and a half ago, his son called me and really has to do something about his drinking, and he's coming to our meetings now. And Buff passed away in 2000, and it's taken that long to find a way to pay him back. I never know what I might do that helps somebody in the room. I know I've had a wonderful time here tonight. I've met a lot of good friends this time. I'm just always amazed that the circle keeps getting bigger. There's so many people in AA all over that are happy, joyous, and free. And I thank you for the time that you've given me and the opportunity to be here tonight. And my friend Don at home has a saying. He said, we're the blessed ones. We get to live a second life in the same lifetime. So thank you very much. Love you all.